All right. Ready?
Let's go.
We are officially live. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Weekly Jargon. This is a special edition. I'm Abel Perez. And to my
Jose
left, I have
Rodriguez.
Jose
Oh, sorry,
Rodriguez.
yeah.
Roy Zachariah.
All right. They're not reading their teleprompters here.
Yeah, we missed that cue for sure.
So anyway, fellas, we are here on a Saturday, actually, and what has transpired over the last few days that has caused the need for another show?
Barbara Walters passed away.
That is true.
And the Pope.
Yeah, and the Pope.
And the Pope
Benedict, yeah.
this
So-
morning, right? Yeah.
So we just wanted to send out condolences to their families, and I know that they're been great examples in.
Well,
in
Barbara
our
was a
society.
colleague of ours. You know, she was considering joining on with the Weekly Jargon, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out.
We just never got an opportunity to get
Yeah.
interviewed, right? So yeah.
Yeah, so we're located here in beautiful Madera, California, and we unfortunately have our Madera Community Hospital that has shut down, closed doors. And
Pretty much.
and in this, if you're in the public and don't really pay too close of attention to what's going on or have connections to people that were sitting on the board or working at the hospital, it almost seems like overnight, right, that this has happened. And it's like, hey, we're closing down in a week or two. And so notices were given to employees right before the holiday, and here we are.
And there was a declaration, an emergency, right, because of the critical services that are provided in our community. So I think it certainly brings attention to Madera, especially in these times preceding or following COVID. But I mean, the conversation is great. I think we need to at least touch on it. So for some of those folks that don't know what's taking place, if you don't keep up with social media, the TV or what have you, the newspapers, and you'll see it that it, like Abel said it earlier, it happened almost overnight. Obviously we thought that this deal was going to happen. There was a new affiliator or someone that was going to purchase it, but that actually fell through after some type of conditions that were placed by the Attorney General. And now, after a meeting that was conducted on Tuesday, special meeting by the Board of Supervisors, I think that was pretty much spelled out of what can happen and what impacts it can have on our community. I think law enforcement really expressed that well. Not only did the sheriff, but also police officers and firefighters and any emergency services that were at the meeting expressed their concerns. Not sure if you want to add anything else before we dive in.
Yeah, no, that the special meeting that was held in the county chambers. It was interesting to hear, and we saw a lot of people that we know personally, professionally, in some way, shape, or form. Madera is somewhat still a small community, right? So everybody still kind of knows everybody, and it was touching to kind of hear all of the testimonies to what Madera Community Hospital has meant for them. Obviously, it impacts a lot of individuals' lives, but we're not just talking about patients, but the employees. And not just in Madera, but all of our surrounding, towns that border Madera as well, reap the benefits of their services. So certainly something that is stirring a lot of emotions. And on the flip side, you also had individuals that were, saying, let it be. You guys, it's a business. The business fell under. And that's what happens when you're not profitable as a business, right? So some may see that as a little bit more cold, right? A little bit more direct, but it is a business that is being operated and it is falling under. Others say, hey, the services there stink, and I've had bad experiences, so they need to get somebody else in there that can change things around, right? Others are saying, hey, let's get the bulldozers, knock it down, and rebuild, and or let's move somewhere else and let that building rot away, right? So there's all these different forms of emotions that are coming, and I think that between the three of us and what we hope to get out of this conversation is just better understanding for you out there, viewers, of what exactly the hospital is, how it operates, the relationship between the city, the county, the state. We'll dive into that, and then just share a little bit of our personal thoughts on what went wrong and how can this be prevented and all of that stuff. Right? We'll peel back the layers to this onion here.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people need to understand, for one, the hospital was already facing a deadline to actually start building a new facility. And, this was something that, because of budgetary reasons, the state kept giving more and more time, but that current building was already set to exhaust. I mean, it doesn't meet, the new codes that were required, and they were having to have a plan to build a new one. So that's why, as it stands right now, for somebody to try and reopen it is not a likely thing. And to some degree, unfortunately, it does mean that it kind of needed to happen. It kind of needed a clean slate to maybe give some, infusion to maybe getting that new facility built, whether it be on the current site or a new site. So
I think the impacts to that is that, and again, I don't think there's any one specific organization, group of people, or person that you can blame on this here, because that's not what we're here for. But in looking at, in light of where we're at today, if in fact that was the case, did we mitigate for that in trying to provide services coming to this point? I know that the plan or the solution was for Trinity Health, at least from what we know, to acquire this hospital and then continue providing the services, right? And obviously that kind of fell through, and that didn't go through. So now we're left here picking up the pieces to see how much we can or what we can scoop up to try to save this, right? Because that's the tone that I heard from a lot of the people that were speaking at the meeting, is that, hey, we need this. Mm-hmm. Not only do the employees there, but the people that it serves, which is our community, and the majority of that is in our city, right? So I want to go back and just take a look at what happened, what's happening with hospitals in California, right? And in an article that I read through the California Association of Hospitals, it stated already that this was back in April, that hospitals in California, at least 40% of them were already operating in the red. After COVID, 51% of those hospitals. And there's several examples that they cite, right? And one of them being one up by San Gabriel Valley that certainly suffered a similar situation. They operate 3 hospitals, but they serve similar demographics, right? A lot of Hispanic, and they get Medi-Cal. 80% of that is Medi-Cal reimbursement, and obviously that's the question right now, or that is the highlight of this, is that we're operating with higher costs, not only for nursing, not only for other costs that increased throughout COVID, and we're operating with this amount of revenue that we get. Obviously, that's going to be a recipe for dipping in the red, because there's no way that the amount of revenue you're getting is going to be able to keep up with the costs that are increasing, right? And that's typically what's taking place in California. There's restructuring going on, reconfiguring of how we're going to operate. But at the end of the day, I think it really affects us here locally, right? We don't see it until it affects us here locally, until you get a notice, hey, you can't walk into the hospital anymore. And I think, Rohi, you've probably been very close to that it's closed, right? So no one can walk into the emergency room. I think the last patient might have been out yesterday. But this is a devastating for our community. And how do we move forward from that, right? What in our opinions, what are the best practices to move forward? We've heard what the CAO had to say. Obviously, there was several options laid out, as far as even considering a district, reallocating certain funds that the state or the federal government had allocated for certain municipalities, agencies. How do we reallocate those dollars to give them here? How do we fundraise? I mean, there were several options laid out, but what would be the best practice moving forward for a hospital of this size and magnitude?
Yeah, so I want to back up a little bit, because you touched on the revenue versus operating expenses, right? And the reason for that is that's kind of the response, right, that we're getting. Hey, we're in this predicament because of these. Jose, so what have you heard out there, from individuals either that are on the board or that are close to it, who've maybe seen the books, things of that nature? So you talk about added costs. What exactly are we working with here?
Well, I mean, according to the CAO and their numbers, again, we don't get to view those numbers because it's a private entity, right? It's a nonprofit private entity. So it's not a public, where they're in the scrutiny of the public to be able to see and examine or audit the budget, right? But this is more of and we got to take their word for what they say, right? And they're hemorrhaging about $2 million a month if not more, right? And that could be because of the added cost during COVID. You noticed that several employees were gone, and then you needed to contract these nurses. So a lot of times, when that happens, you have to contract these traveling nurses. And according to the article and what we've heard so far, you were paying anywhere from $200 to $250 an hour. That amounts to about $375,000 a year if you calculate that, assuming that you're working full time. Now, that's the $2 million, but that's huge. Mm-hmm. That's big. How many nurses have to? I mean, how many nurses do you have to hire to keep that hospital afloat? And on top of that, with COVID, chain supply issues, you have inflation kicking up prices, going even higher, a lot higher than what normal annual increases are going. Expenses for everything. We saw the shortages and different things. So you account for all that together. You still get the same revenues. Mm-hmm. Nothing really changed in the amount of revenues that you're getting, but yet these costs are going higher, right? And if you're going with that gut feeling, well, the government has promised me, the state and or Fed has promised me that I'm going to get reimbursed fully for that. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you're short 40%, then you're left with a huge amount of expenses for this amount of revenue. So you have no other way but to, hemorrhage, and pretty fast.
And you mentioned Medicare,
Medi-Cal and Medicare, correct.
Medicare. 50 and 30% of the reimbursement that the hospital is seeking, or their revenues, right? Do you know anything about the process? I mean, what's the process of like that getting reimbursed, right? Who's paying those bills? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when we talk about demographics, do those patients have the ability to pay even their portion? Are they paying their portion? And then you're kind of in line to get paid on the covered part, right? The insured, you're waiting for that insurer to pay and generate revenue. So it does seem like you're kind of sitting there waiting, hoping that this money comes, and it could be a long wait game.
It could.
I think that's where, I mean, again, going back to like you were talking like our last one about David and Goliath. I mean, you look at the Camarena Center, it is a public entity. It is, essentially state funded, nonprofit. And it's accelerating. They build new buildings. They have, they're just growing and growing and growing. So there's got to be something successful to that program. That is that the model? Is that the model we should be following? Should we just kind of sit back and say, great, no more private entity hospitals that are for nonprofit? Like, let's just let government take it over. Are they running it better? I mean, to me, it looks like it. To me, it looks like it's definitely more well managed. But is that direction we want to really go?
And one can say that they also endured some issues with COVID, right? But not to the extent, I think, the hospital. Obviously, the hospital has all these departments within it. It's one centralized location where if you break your arm, right, you go to the emergency room. From the emergency room, you get x-rays, and radiologist or someone will examine that, and you may need surgery. You may need something. It's all pretty much centralized there. But that's the question. Is operating a centralized hospital with all these departments within them, is it cost prohibitive? Mm-hmm. Does it make sense? Is it profitable? Or does it break even? If it's in this case, just learning those stats that prior to COVID, 40% of the hospitals, and I'm not saying any specific hospital, the stat just said 40% of the hospitals were already operating in red. So that tells you that model, and that may be a model of reimbursement. Obviously, with private insurance, I don't know if they have that issue or not. I'm assuming that hasn't unfolded yet, and we haven't seen that out in the news. But what we do know is that the reimbursements of Medi-Cal and or Medicare have caused an issue in a lot of these hospitals with COVID and the rise of costs in medical care, right? So I feel that that model may be a model that may be diminishing over the next couple of years, maybe in the next decades, where maybe departments, like you said, like a Camarena Health, that may have urgent care, you may have a maternity department out, or you may have cardiology. Logistically, probably not the best, but to operate in a very operate in the black, that may be a way to go. You brought up a good example of Camarena Health. The drawback with Camarena is that they don't have all the services that the hospital encompasses. But I do think that may be a way to look at the way we provide healthcare, especially in our community where we see a lot of these folks that are dependent on of this Medi-Cal, right? I mean, it's unfortunate, but I do think it's a state of an emergency. And I don't want to compare it to issues of emergencies that have happened in the past, but I'll have to bring this point. When 2007 happened and we had the collapse in the financial system, right? I mean, we saw Lehman Brothers go down. We saw Merrill Lynch and all these other big institutions that it was too big to fail. And this is our healthcare system. It's not just happening in California, it's happening nationwide. Should we at least consider this as a state of emergency where you're looking at the federal government saying, hey, look at this. This is too big to fail. Our healthcare system is not functioning with the current situation that we have. How do we fix it going forward? Can we get a similar bailout like you did for these financial institutions? Because you have to put healthcare at the core of the conversation, especially when it comes to distribution of funding to these social programs.
Yeah, no, I think that we are in a state of emergency right now, right? It's been declared, and now as whether you're city council, your board of supervisors within the county, now you have to see the repercussions of not having healthcare services, right? And they've made it very clear. We talked about the first responders, our police departments, or specifically our sheriff, saying it's going to take a body 3 to as long as 8 hours away from their beat, right? We're going to pull them out of there because they may have to take a 5150 out over to the hospital. They have to sit there with them. They have to do paperwork, all of that stuff. Then they have to drive back, right? And we're hoping that, Avenue 9, Avenue 12, or the 99, the 3 ways in or out, the 3 fastest ways in or out of Madera, we're hoping that there's not accidents. We're hoping that there's nothing plugging up those gateways that not only not slow down those first responders from getting out there, but hopefully nobody dies on the way over there, right? It's far. So you have that, but then you also have city and county having to consider, well, how does that affect our other budgets, right? Now we're having to increase our police budget because now they want more people, they want more bodies, they want more units, they want more vehicles, they want transportation vehicles that are almost like little ambulances to go out there, right? Because they're thinking ahead now. They're saying, how do we combat this? How do we overcome this? How do we still provide a service to our people that's necessary for their livelihoods, because we want to keep them alive, we want to keep them safe, all of these things, but we don't have a local hospital, right? So now everybody's budget starts to increase, and let's be realistic. I mean, your budget can only go up so high without having to turn to the people and say, okay, guys, we need money, right? We need to start increasing taxes. We need to start collecting more from services. Or cutting services, right? And so, that's where now you take that from the city, the county, and I think with that special meeting that the county had, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm hoping comes out of that is that now it lights a fire under them. They get their asses over to the state and say, hey, we need help. This cannot happen, right? And I think that is what's gonna happen. 51% of hospitals in the red right now. This is now becoming a reality. Seeing is believing. And so now that you're seeing that a hospital shut down, big Madera County, I mean, we're relatively big, especially when you consider all of, the little towns that are within it and everybody that uses those services. If their hospital can shut down and they could be, and now this is a reality, it could happen to us. We don't want that to happen to us, right? So what do we need to do? We need to, sound the alarms, get the state, get the feds involved, bail us out, help us out, create these systems that are going to ensure that public safety doesn't go under, right? So, I know Madera Community, so it's a nonprofit and it is private, right? So it's operated by a CEO, and along with that CEO, they're hired by the board, right? Mm-hmm. And I bring this up not to try to beat up that board or anything, because we always gravitate to wanting to point a finger, right? Whose fault is it? Why didn't you, do better? All this stuff, right? Well, for one, it's the nature of the environment, right? We are coming off of this pandemic that, if anybody was affected, it was our medical systems, right? Increased costs, supply chains diminished, creating this inflated rates on all the cost of goods, and you can only imagine their supplies costing a bunch. Nurses making $250 an hour. All of that, as you mentioned, just leads to this environment that makes it very difficult. Rohi said David versus Goliath. We were talking about that last week, right? Small business owners versus corporate retailers, right? And with that corporate retail, you have structure, you have levels of experience, levels of accountability that come with that. And the majority of our board that was managing this hospital is made up of small business owners here within the community, all very credible, very, very, successful individuals who, have established themselves the right to be on those boards. But was it just a little too much, right? It doesn't become a little bit too much when you're dealing with these numbers. On top of that, you have a pandemic, and the scale of business is just a lot larger.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my question with that would be, even though they're private, at what point should they have raised the alarm to the city and the county? It sounds like, based on like the report, this was already a known thing. It wasn't something that like got thrown on us last week. It seems like for years it's been an ongoing thing. So at what point should they have
sound the alarm?
Sound the alarm and just said, hey, just so you kind of know we're having this issue, and maybe gotten help earlier on, instead of assuming that this St. Agnes was just going to be the one to take it over.
Yeah. To your point, I think that when you're operating in a private sector, a lot of that information isn't really leaked out to the public. I think you want to try to keep it as close as possible, leak tight, because you don't want to sound alarms too early and have people go a little crazy. But I think if you do it in the right way, where, hey, we're facing some deficits because of COVID, how can we try to resolve this, right?
But this is the first time around. That's the problem with this hospital. In 85, the same hospital was going through bankruptcy as well. And that's when they had to bring in a new CEO and do a change of hand and brought it back to success. So, that's where it's a little different this time. And that's, I think, where the community is maybe a little thrown off, is it's not the first time. This is the first bankruptcy. You can understand they're not really kind of knowing the best practices, but it's the second bankruptcy or potential bankruptcy, and it found its way out before, and this time it didn't.
And I do have issue with that as well. It's like, why sound the alarm 30 days prior to having to shut down, right? And that alarm 30 days out was very low. It didn't start getting loud until, layoff notices were being issued. And it was like, well, what? This is real. And I think even, 2 days ago, you saw people at that special meeting, the public comment, individuals coming saying, please save it. They still had hope that this wasn't going to go through, right? They still had they're still holding on to this hope that, we can still save it today, or Monday they'll still have a job, right? But as far as I understand, it's done. It's shut down.
Yeah.
The emotions, I think, are probably the biggest, because looking and hearing the folks that were lined up to speak publicly, obviously they really shared their emotions as far as not only their commitment to the hospital, especially if you're an employee, but also other residents and organizations that work with the hospital. And my biggest thing now, obviously, one of the options was that agencies forego some of their funds to be able to help and assist, right? And I think a discussion had been brought to the city council several months back regarding that, and obviously it's public record. So if anybody wants to see that, I think the city council certainly took a position on that, or at least gave direction. It was more informational than anything else. But at the moment, I think not having a sense of where those funds would be allocated, I think, are huge. And again, I speak for myself when I say this. Very important. I'm not speaking on behalf of the city council, but for me, I think as a representative of the city, I want to make sure that any monies that are, we have services that we have to provide to the city folks, right? We have fire, we have police, we have water, we have sewer, anything that's got to do with city government, right? And hospitals are not part of it. I'm sure there's some monies that are paid to that, but I don't think to the extent of what they need, right? And when we have funds allocated to us, we allocated those funds 100% to sewer and water. We went through that Prop 218 process. That's also on record. You can always go back and look at that. But that was to try to put the money that was already money that was put into failing infrastructure, such as sewer, some water, and this is a can being kicked down the road. These are we are still in need of money to be able to repair a lot of things that are happening. Obviously, we talked about roads not too long ago, but there's aging infrastructure that certainly will break down in the future, and we've only band-aid just a piece of it with some of those funds that we got. And I'm sure the county did the same. That's why they said that they have to go back and readjust or realign certain projects that they've already approved with that money. And for us, I think it's difficult for us to say, well, here's $1 million, $5 million, whatever the case, the request may be. But how do you say I can give you this much without really having some type of a measure of accountability? You have to know where that money's diverted to, where it's going to, how it's going to be utilized. Because if in fact we do that just to save another week, another month, what happens after that month? If there hasn't been any changes or any measures of accountability, and we still fail, then what do I tell the constituency? I'm sorry, your money was used in this way. This is what you got out of it, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now I have to increase your water bill and I have to increase your sewer bill, right? And again, this is just me giving you my opinion. I think I have to be a good steward of our money, and when I make a decision, I make it based on, give me numbers. How is this going to be allocated? How can we hold you accountable? And that's a bottom line. This is a for even the county and for the city, I think this is a big task, and to take away from these projects that already have been approved that could affect other services critical services that we need. How do we do that to try to save this magnitude of service that we're going to lose in our community or we've lost?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think for a lot of people too, they got to realize that their operating budget was far exceeding what the city would be able to take on, or the county to take on. I mean, it would be the budget. I mean, we'd basically be running the city just to keep a hospital alive. The only thing is, I mean, like in your article, you're talking about, I mean, there was a similar hospital, but it managed to make its way out, through restructuring. I mean, it takes
Exactly.
digging in to make that happen.
Pensions cut.
Yeah,
You had a 20% hit on all the upper level and stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
and I don't know how that's doing. Again, it said 51% after COVID. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they're still part of the 51. They're just hemorrhaging less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, and looking at it, I mean, the question I know some of the community people had is like, why aren't they taking a loan out? Why aren't they attempting to try and stay afloat, a little longer? It was kind of just like, it was cut the rope, just let it go, let it sink, and, kind of that's the way it's going to be. And maybe that is the best thing. I mean, maybe we just can't see the big picture and understand that as a whole project, maybe that is the best for the city and the county and everybody involved, to just let it go down and let something fresh and new come about,
I think that's where transparency is key, though, right? If that's the direction, right? And we talked about, the board or the CEO or who's the recipient of the sale of it, right? Or the depletion of assets, right? When all those assets are sold off and you're trying to recoup, where does that money go? And maybe that's a question for a different type of professional.
The only thing I could say that, Abel, and that's where I think the board may find themselves in trouble, is you had a board member who also served as a county council member. So there was transparency. That person had access to that information.
Yeah.
So, I think now is that maybe something that's required in the future? Should city and county have a sitting council member on the board,
right,
to maybe have that insight? But in this case, there was unfortunately that person there with that knowledge from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when this was starting to fail. So.
And I think you're sitting back waiting on funds, and we've all been. I've been there. Where you're waiting for that paycheck to hit the bank account so you can pay your bill, and what happens if there's a delay in payroll, and that in the weekend comes and puts you in a pretty tight spot, right? And this is on a much grander scale where it seems like the management or the board sitting back waiting for that check. It hasn't come. It's being delayed, and you're still hoping that it does. But again, sound the alarm, right? And asking for transparency is easier when it comes from the city council, county supervisors, right? Those public, anytime they meet, it's on public record. But when you're talking about a private entity, a private nonprofit where their books are essentially closed, then that's where it gets a little hairy, right? You mentioned, people don't want to sound the alarm too early, right? But now you have, I mean, it's almost like should the board be held accountable for not sounding the alarm too early, or are they just victims of pulling the plug too early, right? Because from the looks of it, there's a lot of different hospitals that are facing the same thing, over half of them in the state. And so it's almost inevitable that this is going to become a reality for a majority of those hospitals, right? But we might be that example of what could happen, and we might see a bailout. We might start seeing bailouts, and I can guarantee you, like I'm saying, if you've been in that, if you're a hospital and you've been in that red, and you're privately nonprofit and all that stuff, and you're writing letters right now, you're saying, hey, we're in that same situation. Do you want to see, another major county within the state shut down, medical services? That's going to start getting a lot of attention, and I can bet that Madera is simply the example of the unfortunate example of what could happen, and it's probably going to save a whole lot of other hospitals because of that.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing now is that the options that are presented, I mean, these are options that are being considered, right? And I think one of them was a districting of the hospital, and that certainly has potential of generating funds and revenues, but again, at the cost of the taxpayers, right? Because then you have to be able to vote on it. LAFCO then would get involved in formulating that district. Where does that district reach? Is it only in the city? Does it go outside? Can it cross? Because districts can cross county lines, but how far do we go? Who do we serve? What are the people that we serve? And then do folks resonate with that? Do they want to add additional taxes? That's always been a topic too, not only with school districts and what have you, but anytime there's a new bond going out there to build a new high school, there's always some resistance in trying to pay for that. Well, why are we paying for schools? We should have portables. We should, I mean, it's the service. To what degree do you want to provide the service, right? And I think to the hospitals, that in itself is a good idea, but it's about 1.5 to 2 years out in order to formulate that. So that's not a quick response. It's not a quick option we can do. It's something we can plan for, and hopefully we may be able to see something like that to again provide the level of service that our community deserves, right? So I may question as to why wasn't this considered. I'm sure it has, and I don't talk to the individual board members about it because I haven't had an opportunity, but I'm sure it's probably been brought up at some point in the future. Should we provide, or should we have a district so that more and more ratepayers can fund this? And some may say, hell no. And some may say, well, definitely, I would support that because we need a hospital. We do need a hospital.
And that's where I think a hospital is hard to sell too, like in that regard, because it's not like water where we all use water.
Correct.
Or it's like a hospital. Well, I don't go to the hospital. Yeah. I don't, it's not something I regularly visit as a patient and have that service. It's, a small population of people that may use it maybe regularly or obviously an emergency. So to kind of say like, hey, you're going to get stuck with a $25 a month fee to have a hospital. Why? I don't even go to the hospital. Yeah. My choice would be, maybe I'm going to the Fresno hospital. Why am I paying? So I think that's also a hard pill to swallow as a taxpayer to say, hey, guess what? You're going to pay X amount of dollars a month so you can have this facility that you may never use in your lifetime. Right. Or maybe you will.
Yeah.
We're insured through Kaiser Insurance, right? So everything, it's a one-stop shop there. And kind of to your point, is that the model? I mean, Kaiser's pretty effective using that one-shop stop, right? Everything's in-house, and it's managed that way. But it's a major network of hospitals throughout Northern California that certainly helps out quite a bit. But would I want to pay that additional tax to see that? Now, I have to ask myself this: how pissed off am I going to be at the world, at Madera, if myself or one of my loved ones needs emergency services, and I have to drive them all the way to Fresno, right? Yeah. So even though I have Kaiser Insurance, if my kids or my wife or someone is, bleeding out or, in a position where they don't have time to make that 25-minute drive, hoping that there's no traffic conditions, right? I'm stopping right here.
Yeah.
I'm stopping right here and getting them immediate attention because that's the difference between them living or dying. And I can tell you that right now, it's going to take somebody with a lot of friends, very popular, to be in that predicament, and it's going to stir some major controversy.
I'm sure it does. And kind of to your point about Kaiser, I think Kaiser, I don't know if they take in any Medi-Cal patients or not, or Medicare. I don't know how they get their funding, but I'm sure a lot of it's private insurance. So they have a business model that works for them, because I'm sure they can fully charge up to 100%. But to your point, I think that's the ultimate deal, is to have a centralized, kind of like what we have here, that can take care of all of those things all in one. But again, it's the amount of revenue that comes into it to be able to operate, right? That's always a big issue. With districts, of course, I mean, we have unified school districts, right? And to Rohi's point earlier is that not everybody attends schools, but you want to invest in that community so you have a good educated population that will serve, and again, continue to be those same taxpayers that will give back into the community. You have those in the cemetery districts. I mean, we're not dying every day. We don't expect to die. Well, I hope I don't expect to die until a long time. But nevertheless, we have these cemetery districts that service these districts, right? Service these cemeteries. So when a family or a loved one does pass away, they have a place that they can go rest in peace, right? And I think when it comes to districts, that's just going to be up to the public whether they want to support something of this magnitude, like a hospital. I think it would be one of the biggest districts that we've undertook here in the county itself.
So establish a district, blow up the old hospital, build a new one. I mean, you kind of, if you're starting fresh, you might as well start fresh, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so, you know, and I've experienced, I experienced it just last night. I was here at 5 o'clock at the office and worked with the client, young couple, families here in Madera, grandparents were here in Madera, and they literally told me, Jose, that they're now going to be looking in Fresno. They go, well, because I heard the hospital's shutting down and stuff like that, and we want to have kids, and it's a real thing. And so now we're losing a family that or offspring of a family that has been here in Madera in the community, and it has actually been very strong contributors of the community, very active members. But now it's like, well, we want a town like this because we want to start a family and all those things, right? But what do you need? You need health care for your family if you're going to be here, right? You need those emergency services.
I think that if you had to rate the services that any community needs, obviously public safety, education, and healthcare, and I think those three go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah.
So without either one, I think people will look elsewhere, and that's unfortunate, because for us to have prospects coming into our city but fly us by because of that is unfortunate, because we're trying to attract, we're putting our net out there as big as we can to try to capture as much business and or folks that want to move to Madera, because it's still a very safe community. These are issues that not only Madera is facing, but other municipalities and other areas are also facing. But know that we're very resilient, and I think I'm not sure if I heard that at the one of the public comments, but we're very resilient, and I think we come together to find solutions. That's the one thing about Maderans, is that we're very resilient. We'll come up with a solution. We hope that the state, the Fed, even the Attorney General, if any, we may be able to get some help in some way. I know that Senator Ana Caballero has allocated in her department, has procured at least $5 million for the hospital. They're yet to see that, so hopefully we can get those funds underway, maybe help in some way. But I know a lot of folks are behind this. Assemblymember Soria is also part of this. I got a phone call from newly elected Congressman John Dutra. He wants to be involved. I'm sorry, I take that back. Not John Dutra. I take that back. John Duarte, and I'm sorry, John Dutra is president of our company, so I apologize for that. That was John Duarte.
John wants to help out, huh?
But anyhow, a lot of folks that want to come together and find a solution for this. So know that we hope to find something, and hopefully we can do this. And when I say that, I speak for myself and not on behalf of anyone. It's still a lot of discussion that has to take place in your own boards within your own jurisdictions. But as a resident of the city of Madera, I certainly want to see that we continue to have those healthcare services for sure.
I think that's the biggest thing. Just people understanding is it is a private nonprofit And so their books are essentially closed unless they open them up, right? And just like if a friend was asking you to, borrow, 20 grand, you kind of want to know the game plan of getting paid back, right? Well, how am I going to recoup this money, right? Where is it coming from? And that's going to require you to share your plan, have a plan, share it, and then if it makes sense and it's then you could probably expect to get that loan. And I see that the same way. You have the hospital saying, hey, we need help. We have the community saying, hey, help them. But if you're city or county, you still have an obligation to your people with it within your budget. So for you, it's important to be asking those questions so that you're not sitting on your board now with the deficit saying, oh my gosh, we're failing because we're trying to help when we have our own internal issues, right? So I think that's where it's not just like a snap your finger, write the check, let's open right up right away. You have levels of accountability, and that's what every board's there for, right? And I feel for the board of the hospital because they're in a position right now that is probably not a good feeling, right? They got a lot of naysayers right now, and again, it's unfortunate that they're in an industry that seems to be failing. 51% all in the red. That's a failing industry, right? That's a very difficult task at hand to create profitability, especially when you have Medicare, all as 80% of your revenues. That's difficult, right? Those are obstacles, but it's not impossible. Transparency is key. Get transparent. Start opening the books, allowing people to look at it. What's done is done. How do we move forward from here? How do we save health services to the community and county of Madera so that we're not having to, hate Madera later because our family members were affected because they couldn't get to a hospital in time.
Yeah, and you hear it. I mean, it's unfortunate that some of the social media posts that I hear, obviously, if it's not the hospital, it's, the loss of a certain store, a certain restaurant, and what have you. And, I mean, things are going to happen, folks. I mean, this isn't the first time that it's happened in Madera, and it's not going to be the last. And it's not just Madera that's experiencing these issues. I think nationwide, you can say that. Obviously, COVID did have an impact in a lot of communities. Some, weathered the storm, and others just couldn't weather it, and it's not all COVID. It's not all COVID. They're business decisions. Some people make business decisions as to why they want to close doors, why they want to leave, and what have you. But to blame it on the Madera, it's Madera. What exactly? You have to pinpoint what exactly it is about Madera. Is it a specific person? Is it an organization? What is it? I mean, if you can kind of pinpoint to that, then we can try to find answers to that and see how we can provide solutions. But with that, I think we've pretty much covered a lot of this here. I'm not sure if you want to add anything else. I do want to say that there are going to be conversations had at your respective boards, right? You're going to have these conversations had at the Board of Supervisors because they have another meeting coming up. Obviously, the City Council will have to discuss on any direction they'd like to take. But again, that's still a discussion that needs to be had. And certainly, I'm not answering any questions that we don't have an answer for because we haven't had those discussions and no direction yet. But to your point, Abel, I think Madera will see something out of this, and hopefully, kind of like what I said, resiliency will overcome, and we'll be able to find solution for that.
Yeah, certainly. And unfortunately, I think I'm sticking to it. I think we're just the example.
Yeah.
The example of what not to do or what could become of the circumstances that we're in. And so it'd be nice to see how this unfolds, and obviously nice to see us with healthcare services again in town, whether that means reopening what we already have. But I think at this point it's like reopen, sustain ER services. If we want to rebuild, or if to talk about rebuilding or having somebody come in and rebuild, hopefully this puts us in a spotlight to where other hospitals may be considering, hey, let's make the move there, right? There's a need, and maybe we can fulfill it, and maybe we can end up with some nice facilities here.
I totally agree. The one thing that I want to just point out is that during the time of crisis, you can't really put a tag on life, right? And the resources that are used to be able to save that life, especially during COVID, whether it be ventilators, whether it be, ICU and just having a staff of nurses. I mean, that's really tough. And you're given not guarantees, but you're given these promises that you'll be reimbursed. I mean, it's hard not to say, hey, I have to go all in here because folks are dying. We need all the beds that we can use. And given that, you put everything out there to try to save lives, but you fall short when it comes to revenues to continue that service, that level of service. Given the circumstances that took place over COVID, I think that really makes that's huge. That's huge, and it's hard to operate that way. I think not only for Madera. I think, like you said, I mean, after COVID, 51% of hospitals in California are facing similar issues. Now, I don't know if it's one specific hospital, several hospitals, but you can always check that data there at the calhospitals.org, because that's kind of where the information's at. So take a look at that, kind of see what's taking place. Don't take our word for it. Again, this is your folks just giving you a humble opinion of what we see and what we've uncovered so far. But any comments that you have, please let us know. We would like to be part of that.
Yeah, we'll follow this story and maybe hop back on here as the segment just to kind of keep you guys posted on what transpires. If anything major breaks, we'll hop back on here and discuss it. So right now we're just kind of going off of the information that's been given to the public, which is almost very little, right? It's almost just like, hey, this was a problem. This is what happened. We're shutting down, and now we're shut down. And so I think right now we're in a state, everybody's scrambling to find some answers. Everybody's scrambling to get to the root cause and ultimately get to a solution. So follow us, the Weekly Jargon podcast, and we will keep you informed on random jargon and, of course, some, headlines like a national emergency in Madera County.
There you go.
All right. Take care.